right. Hello, welcome everyone to Sport Tech Daily's episode with Peter Browne. He's done a PhD in sport and performance analytics and also been involved with clubs like Western Bulldogs, AFL and Melbourne Vixens in netball. Welcome, Pete. How are you?
Thanks, going very well. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. No worries at all. Well, look, as always, we're going to start off with yourself. Can you tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, of course. I guess I started off with not necessarily in sport and just did a general science degree at the University of Melbourne, more looking at physiology from more of a medical background with the aim of going to physiotherapy. However, at the end of that, got the opportunity to do an honours with the VIS, Melbourne Vixens and Victoria University in performance analysis. And that was kind of my first little exploration into sports and analytics within that. Was lucky enough after that to transition into the PhD, which moved away from netball and into Australian football with the Western Bulldogs. And it's kind of developed from a little bit less performance analysis and moved into a little bit more of a skill acquisition analytics combination.
Awesome. All right. And can you tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing in your PhD and your area of research?
Yeah. So it's, as I was saying, it's a bit of a combination. So it's kind of trying to borrow from computer science, skill acquisition and performance analysis. And we're trying to borrow like the little bits and pieces from each of them and see if we can marry them together to come up to improve some methodologies around how we actually look at sport. Because a lot of what we do in performance analysis is recording what's actually happened, but in bringing in like a what we call an ecological dynamics approach, we're trying to understand how and why that's actually occurring. So we're trying to bring some more context to the stats that we're recording. So we've been looking at more how we can better understand what's going on in matches so that we can then improve training design.
Yeah, excellent. All right. And can you give us a high level overview of some of the organizations that you've worked with and some of the work you've done with them?
Yeah, definitely. Through, I guess, starting with the Western Bulldogs, I'm quite lucky in that the program's embedded within my PhD. So a lot of the work I do with them is kind of facilitated around what I'm also trying to work out in my PhD, and the questions we're trying to answer are much the same, which is very lucky from a PhD perspective to have such an applied side to it. Lucky again to be able to work in the coach's box on game day for the past 2 seasons, and now having moved more over to netball with Netball Victoria, working on their game days as well. So it's very exciting being able to experience that coach's box, and it's something that I guess every fan wants to know what's actually going on in there and what's being said on the phone. So getting those insights was incredible.
Right.
And then I guess in a day-to-day basis, going to every training session and seeing what the club's actually doing to get ready each week and how they prepare was really insightful. And then I guess moving over to netball and working with the Victorian Fury and Melbourne Vixens, it's the same but different. It's on a much smaller scale. Without champion data, they're providing a lot of those live in-game stats and having broadcasters there giving you 4 feeds or 4 different angles of the game. So it's a little bit different, and but at the same time, it comes with different challenges, which are really exciting. And how many stats can you record live and be able to push to the coaches to inform their decision making live in game? So it's kind of the same across both, in that it's just trying to see what I've been able to collect live during games and then pushing them onto the coaches.
Right, excellent. And with your background now, in the future, could you apply this to a range of sports? And what are a couple of the sports that you could work with?
I think that's where I've been really lucky with the way that the PhD has been set up. We've focused and the way that even the Bulldogs and the Melbourne Vixens and Victorian Fury operate is that a lot of it is dependent on answering questions that the coaches have. So it's very much being able to manipulate what you're doing for coach specific. So even what we're doing at the Bulldogs might not be applicable at another club just based on the coaches. And that's where I think, I've been really lucky that I will be able to take some of these skills and understanding how to use sports code and code in R to produce reports will be transferable. And a lot of the underlying themes that we've been trying to apply throughout my PhD can go across codes. And I would really love to see it in, I guess I've got a bit of a bias towards training design. And I think within basketball, especially in the NBA, where it's so game heavy, their schedule, looking at how you could potentially make those training sessions more efficient and get greater transfer of skill into games would be a really, really exciting and really difficult problem to solve. But I think there's, a lot of scope to do work in that area.
Yeah, excellent. All right. And yeah, I guess in terms of your experiences with your PhD at Victoria University and then the work that you've done with various organizations, can you, I guess, tell us a bit about the difference between life at university and life in a high performance sport environment?
Yeah, definitely. It's surprisingly similar but very different at the same time. The main difference is probably just the time frame that things need to be turned around in. It's very, obviously in the high performance sports setting, it's very much as soon as training's over, we want the report and we want to be able to analyse it so we can plan for the next day and the next week and what's going in the game. Whereas from a research perspective, we've got a bit more time and we can tinker around with the analysis a little bit and see if we can get a slightly different result. And whether that takes a week or two, then that's okay. It's about getting that, I guess, very accurate result. Whereas in the high performance setting, you could be slightly less accurate, but it can be more applied if you can get it straight away and they can reuse it. So that's probably the main difference. I definitely have been lucky how the PhD has been embedded with the club. So the kind of questions we're trying to answer are very similar. It's just in the research side of it, we can go into a lot more depth because we've got the time.
Right, excellent. It sounds like a perfect balance.
Yeah, I think the way that Vic Uni have set it up with the partnerships and actually getting you heavily embedded within a club or an organisation really helps make the research applied and so that it can have implications for like actual coaches or teams to use the research.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. And what about sort of different resources? So whether that's people in your network or sort of technical resources, which have been the biggest help in your journey so far?
I think people have actually been a massive help in being able to shape the way that I've looked at what I have. Like supervisors are a massive help. Not everyone is lucky enough to have access to supervisors if they're at home trying to understand something, or even at like local clubs. So that's the other thing in forming relationships and talking with coaches. While they haven't necessarily been able to help on the technical side, they've really been able to give me some really good insights into the questions they actually want answered, rather than just coming up with a solution for a question that's not there. So coaches have been really helpful in guiding that question and problem solving aspect. And then other PhD students have been a massive help as well, just because I guess you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So most people, if you do run into a roadblock, have dealt with it before. And the Bulldogs have a really good network of PhD students, both there currently and who have recently finished. And the other one is, I guess, Google. It's a classic one, but it's probably saved me a lot in my PhD, and open source resources like DataCamp and Coursera courses are huge in that, I guess, that foundation knowledge in stats and coding as well.
Excellent. Well, look, that was actually my next question. In terms of the tools and the types of modeling and analysis that you've had to do, say in the last handful of years, which would you say that you've had to rely most upon?
Definitely R. R's kind of become my life over the past probably 2-3 years. So, but in saying that, 3 years ago before I started my PhD, I'd never used it. So it is a tool that can be learnt. I definitely still Google a lot, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's what my supervisors tell me all the time as well. Like even the people who are really good and really coherent with their coding will still have to resort back to Google and Stack Overflow to find out what's going on. So yeah, it's probably R. And then also from I guess the high performance sports side, sports code, probably the main tool used in games to code, or I guess to annotate film and work out what's going on in training and games.
Cool.
And I've transitioned away from Excel to R as well. So
right.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, like in terms of data cleaning and preparation, etc., do you use R for that as well, or is there anything else like a SQL or a Python that you've had to sort of pick up as well?
Yeah, I've been lucky enough in R that there's I guess a group of packages called the Tidyverse. which are really helpful in kind of that data wrangling and cleaning up your data. At the moment, I'm trying to learn Python as well, because there's definitely some crossover, or I guess differences between R and Python where you can get different benefits. So I'm trying to pick up Python as well, but yeah, at the moment, mainly using R for the data cleaning side of it.
Nice. Okay. And in terms of, people that are looking to get into the sport tech industry now, whether that's on the analysis side, whether that's on the sort of more high performance side, what advice would you give for someone to get started and get involved?
I guess there's a lot of opportunities in sport, but they're quite hard to come by. So I guess firstly is getting a foot in the door. So a lot more clubs are creating partnerships with universities now, and that can be a really good way if someone's doing a bachelor degree in sports science or the like, where they can potentially, the university open the door for them so they can take advantage of cadetships or intern programs.
Right.
However, I guess not everyone has access to that. So even looking at grassroots and local clubs, as I guess technology is getting more and more accessible, it's kind of filtering down. So there's opportunities there to start to, I guess, upskill and work on actually applying the analytical techniques in the applied setting. So as opposed to just being able to do them at home and pulling data off the AFL website, and actually starting to build those relationships with coaches and work through that progress there. And I think it can be a really important way, because when you do get to that, I guess goal for a lot of people in working with that high-end elite club, you've got that foundation of knowledge that you've been able to show that you can actually do stuff.
Yeah.
And I think the other benefit is that in that setting, you can actually experiment a little bit more. It's probably a lot more hard and fast. This is what we want, and this is what you're going to do in that high performance setting. But I guess at that level where they're not necessarily used to getting it, they give you that bit more freedom, so you can actually experiment and do some more things that interest you.
Right. Okay. And I was just going to say, from a technical point of view, a lot of people, the first step is Excel. So in
Yeah.
terms of moving from Excel in your own little bubble, and then moving to things like R or Python or whatever else, do you have any recommendation in terms of making that transition technically?
Yeah, it's probably taking it in small steps. One thing that I still get excited about is when my code actually works and doesn't have any bugs in it. So even doing things that you know how to do in Excel and doing them in R or Python is a really good way that you can check that what you're doing is accurate. The online courses are great to give you that baseline foundation. The other area that you can look at is like Python and RStudio on their websites. They have step-by-step tutorials on how to pick up the basics, which can be really helpful. I found the Python one really clear because I guess it's being written by the people who wrote the program and want people to use it. So they've got a lot of investment in it. So I've found that one really helpful, and R and RStudio have the same thing there.
Right.
Even Twitter's been a big one, just following people who, like Hadley Wickham, who works at RStudio. Often you'll see little tips and tricks that he'll post, and being able to pick up little things that way that are probably assumed knowledge for a lot of things, but you kind of forget about them. So there's a lot of online resources to pick up those skills to slowly move away.
Right.
I think it's about consistently working on it, and then doing those little projects that you know how to do in Excel, and then just slowly building your way up in R or any coding language, really.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. And how about yourself personally? We were just having a chat about this off air, but what's your favorite sport and also sporting team?
Yeah, I guess sport. As a kid, I played a lot of sports, so I'm not set on any particular sport. I love my Australian football, and I go for the Hawks there. So there's a lot of family history going back with Hawthorn, and my dad was a boundary umpire in the AFL or VFL crossover.
Nice.
So we've been a footy family, but as a kid it was always basketball. So I'd love to work in basketball at some stage, and I think there's a lot of, or I guess you look at the data they have in the NBA, and there's so much there, and there's so many different questions that could be answered with that data, and and they're probably setting the trend in using that data both from a spatio-temporal perspective and looking more in depth at what's happening rather than just how far the players are running, but say they're shooting coming off a pick and roll and the like. So you can start to get more and more specific the more data we've got. So I think it's a really exciting space, and I think the NBA are kind of showing a lot of stuff that can be done in that way.
Cool. Well, look, I think you've obviously got a very diverse background in terms of sports that you've worked with, and obviously you're also personally interested in. I think one thing that was becoming apparent is there's a lot of, I met up with a sports tech startup that essentially said that a lot of the companies in Australia, they almost feel like they need to go validate themselves in the US, come back, and then they'll be taken much more seriously when they're back in Australia. From your point of view, what kind of opportunities do you see for people that are in the sports tech industry in Australia to potentially go, overseas and partner with other companies there?
Yeah, it's a big, I guess it's a big market in the US, but you're right. You get that credibility when you've got like the NBA or the MLB logo next to your product. So yeah. I think there is a lot of scope for Australians to go over to the US and operate. We're quite well known for our sports science. I guess a lot of the way their sports operate, it's more front office and back office, and they do have a lot of people coming with more statistical degrees rather than having that sport background. So I think there's a big scope there if someone has kind of the technical stats and machine learning skills, but combined with that sport knowledge, that it can be a really good benefit to American sports, where there's kind of probably a little bit, or from what I can perceive, a bit of a separation between the hard analytics and then also like the sporting side. So I think there's scope there where Australians, and I guess you see a lot of sports scientists are coming out of their bachelor degrees, but then going into these more analytical roles. So I think that's an area where Australia has a lot of potential.
Yeah, and I think definitely that's one of the reasons why I thought up of Sport Tech Daily. It'd be great to keep a lot more people that are coming through and sort of almost going out of sport science or sport analytics into banking or retail, just because the band isn't there potentially. So it'd be great for the industry to evolve and have a lot more opportunities in this space.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because a lot of the skills that we do have in the sport area do transfer over to business. But yeah, it would be lovely if more and more people could stay in sport and expand the way that we're using our analytics in sport, and rather than being locked into what we currently do and evolving that and showing some innovation there, so we can lead the world in what we're actually doing.
Yeah, excellent. And look, the last question, and I love asking this one. I think it'll be great for you because you've got such a diverse background. But if you could work with one sporting team or a player within the sport, and you could help them out with a problem, who would it be? What would the problem be, and why?
Definitely have a bias towards the Hawks, and I think given everything that's going on with COVID-19 at the moment and the talk of coming back to a 3-week preseason training block and then potentially resuming the AFL season, I think it'd be really cool to work with the Hawks or any club, because it seems like all over the world they're looking at doing this mini preseason. And seeing how you could best utilize that such a small window to look at the way that you're educating the players and working with the coaches, so that you can get the most bang for your buck out of those 3 weeks. So you could get the most transfer from that training period into a potentially shortened season. That's, I think, for me, it's all about training efficiency and making sure that we're getting all the skill work that we're doing is actually coming through into our games as well.
Excellent. Do you think, well, let's say AFL as an example, what do you think is the least amount of time they should be given between starting the mini preseason and first day of game day?
It's a really tough question. I saw a study that looked at the NFL when they had the lockout and the number of Achilles that were done, and there was maybe I can't remember exactly, but there might have been over a 4 or 5 year period, there was maybe a handful of Achilles. And then they had the lockout, and then they did a shortened preseason and came back, and there was 10 plus in that short preseason. So from a physical load, I don't know, but I think it does make me question, because the players training by themselves, I'm sure that like they're doing all that they can, but there's a lot more that comes into it when you're starting adding that physical nature and change of direction and that decision making. So I think that one's probably more up to the high performance and the people who know the human body and how it's going to react to that large impact. But
Yeah.
I think from a skill perspective, it really depends on how much of the coaches have been thinking about changing the game plan and how much the players have been able to do.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of questions from a physical load perspective, and that kind of, it's a hard one to study, because there's hasn't been many opportunities to have a shortened preseason like this. But that NFL study did make me raise my eyebrows and think about it a little bit more.
Right, and it's super interesting because I think in the rugby league they're talking about potentially a minimum of say 2 weeks, and I think the AFL was saying a minimum of 3 weeks. So if it is something like 2 or 3 weeks, and then potentially they're playing more than a game a week to try to get more games in, that I think it's something really serious that the coaches are going to obviously have to think about.
Definitely, and I guess the AFL have tried to preempt that with the shortened quarters and the interchange rotation just being open. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of factors at play that could potentially come into play.
Yeah, and I think from the layman's terms point of view, people like myself, we're just sport fans. We just want the footy on. So.
Just bring it back. So.
No, excellent. Well, look, it was really interesting chatting with you, Pete. Thank you so much for your time. I think for a lot of the people that are going to end up watching this, it's, for what you've done in the industry already, is it's going to be really inspirational. So thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to check out more of our content, go to sporttechdaily.com or follow us on social media across Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram.